CloudX is our featured supplier guest today, and the topic is on the screen: AP invoice, statement, and payment automation for dealerships. And we have Keith Deans, CFO at Strategic Source, here to kick the session off. Keith, take it away.
Almost 2 years ago, Strategic Source began our innovative supplier webinar series with the goal of introducing suppliers and solutions to drive cost reduction and revenue generation and process improvements. And so today we have CloudX, and we get a double helping from the Chris team, from Chris Stearns and Chris Cosgrove, who are going to show us what some of the best practices are with regard to AP invoice and statements and payment automation. Just to let you know, the webinar will be available in 24 hours. And so we look forward to what they're going to be able to share today. And at this time, I'll invite Chris Cosgrove and Chris Stearns to share more about invoice statements and payment automation.
Hello, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you all today. Our goal for today's session is to help you to learn how invoice statement and payment automation works, the benefits of end-to-end AP automation, and what makes AP Smart from CloudX stand out for dealerships. So a little about CloudX. We've been around since 2011, entering the AP automation space with our SaaS delivery. We entered the automotive space in 2017, beginning to work with DealerTrack, and have since expanded our offering to multiple DMSs that you'll see listed there on the right, including CDK Global, Techion, and active integrations being built out to Dealer-Built and Dominion View. CloudX was founded by Danny Teklahamanat, myself, and also joining us today on the call, who's been with us for quite a long time as well, to the very early days of CloudX, is Chris Stearns, who's our national automotive manager. So I should say, CloudX designs. Hey Chris.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining. I might be talking a little later, but just wanted to pop in here and say thank you very much. We really appreciate it, and we're excited to be able to present today.
Absolutely, thank you. So our goal is to help businesses of all sizes, but especially in automotive, enhance their efficiency, their visibility and profitability across several key financial functions. First and foremost, our primary solution is around this AP invoice processing and ultimately payments automation as well, which is now a fully integrated process. And so we have multiple solutions that are centered around this kind of intersection of transactional document management in the cloud. And so we'll talk about that a little bit today. So our first poll question is coming up here. What percentage of B2B payments are executed via check? I'll give a few seconds for you to address those. Very good. So the answer for that would be 25% of payments today in the B2B space are still executed via check. All right, you should be able to see that result right there. So not far off the mark. So two of you got that right. Wonderful. Okay.
For some reason, we are having just a little sticking point on that second poll question, Chris.
No problem. No problem. Well, I'll throw out the question. I know you guys won't be able to answer back to it, but we'll still establish a little understanding. What is the average cost to process a paper-based invoice today? And since I won't give you the answers, I'll just let you know the average cost today is $7 to move an invoice from presentment to posting. A lot of that is tied into just the obvious, manual effort of data entry, the validation components that go on with routing it internally. All of these are different cost components that can ultimately drive inefficiency in that space, or consequently, if you have automation, some efficiency around that, but definitely an area ripe for cost reduction. So moving on, paper invoices and statements, no more. Basically, if you've been around, manual AP invoice processing, you understand there's quite a bit of data that has to move off of the supplier invoice into your DMS. And then obviously there's a couple different tracks depending on the invoice type, whether it needs to get GL coded, for maybe a services or utilities type invoice, or PO matched for any kind of inventory driven invoice. What this basically means for your AP team is that there's constant data entry Depending on where the invoice is originating in your organization, there's lots of opportunities for things to get misplaced, to get lost, certainly to just have a lack of visibility because things are now moving between these kind of quasi-electronic flows through email, and maybe with some locations even operating in inter-office mail, or we've seen couriers moving things back and forth. And so there's all these disjointed components to a manual AP process, which really don't have to be the case anymore in this digital age that we live in. Additionally, some of these problems are exacerbated through accounting staff turnover, and we've routinely seen many dealerships and other businesses struggle with staff retention, right, and finding qualified staff to support these kind of processes as their businesses are scaling. And so for anybody who's kind of worked in managing these kinds of personnel or having to hire it, how difficult that can be when facing one of those setbacks. And so through automation, you can start to kind of eliminate some of those headaches and provide yourself scale through electronic initiatives. Additionally, everything we've discussed thus far is really centered around the front end of the invoice process and bringing data into the system. But then you have the back end of AP, which is contemplating the payments piece. And so if you have kind of a dysfunctional or disjointed process or an inefficient process, it can certainly impact the overall time to get an invoice posted, but then also consequently to get a vendor paid, which can lead to all kinds of tangential issues, late payment fees, strained vendor relations, and things like that. And then on top of it, every month you get to go through a wonderful month-end close process where you're trying to, reconcile your books and also ostensibly provide an accrual forecasting towards what your spend's going to be like next month when the roller coaster ride starts all on over again. And so this can also lead to a lack of standardization across multiple locations. So this is especially relevant for multi-store groups where you may have vendor invoices and costing coming in from different price points for different services or inventory items, and you just don't have visibility to that, and consequently can't establish standardized pricing within your group. So with all that said, there's plenty of ways now to mitigate some of these issues, and so we're going to focus on that. As we just discussed, kind of the average cost to process an invoice today is around $7. We've certainly seen much higher. Some businesses are a little more organized and have a lower cost because they've done some things about centralizing their accounting practice. But after automation, you really have an opportunity to drive those costs down through electronic means. And so hopefully we can give you a little bit of clarity into that today. So the third poll question is this: what percent of CFOs recently named digital transformation generally as a top 5 priority? We'll give a few more seconds for those to come in. Okay, good. Yeah, so the answer to that question would be 80%. Very high percentage of CFOs are seeing this as a pivotal need, and obviously this can bleed over into lots of different areas in a dealership, context that can be, front office, back office, support, service, and all those kinds of things. And so within the accounting space, digital transformation is what we like to think of, at least in the AP department, the opportunity for AP automation and this kind of end-to-end process. And so we want to kind of focus now on the overall approach to the solution and how the process flows. Our moniker here on the left of digitize, automate, and monetize is really the way we approach the transformation of this AP cycle at CloudX via AP Smart. And so in the invoice presentment phase, this is really when your vendors are submitting invoices to you for processing, right, and for ultimate payment. Now, what we like to do is help drive that traffic to the most efficient way possible in terms of bringing those into the AP Smart environment. And we set up a couple different pathways to facilitate that. First and foremost, many businesses were kind of already kind of moving down this route where they provide, a dedicated AP email address where vendors can submit to. But what we found as a best practice in a multi-store auto group especially is where if we can help you establish a dedicated email address per rooftop, we then have kind of an intended destination. And so later in the course of utilizing our software, we can have, users by location. And if you start to think about how dealerships function, they generally have kind of duties delineated by, GMs, sales managers, service managers, parts managers. There's a departmentalization and consequently an association of a specific user or an authority figure based on the role in that location. So if we understand at the outset when an invoice is coming in how that is to be assigned or that relationship departmentally inside of a location, we can use that intended target to get it to the right person based on a vendor assignment or a GL assignment or departmental assignment that are all kind of configurable within our workflow. So that being said, email has definitely become the most prevalent way that vendors are submitting invoices today. It's beneficial to them because it eliminates latency and it eliminates the time in the mail and lost, physical mail. They don't have to print and mail something which has an additional cost, and they can just push it to you electronically. And so if you can route something like that directly into your AP flow, that's massively helpful. For anything that's coming in via hard copy, those can simply be scanned either through a desktop scanner or a multifunction device. And then ultimately what CloudX does is basically performing a capture and validation service on your behalf. And so what we'll work with you to do is establish an exact subset of data based on the category of invoice that we're looking at. And so when we're approaching these transactional documents that drive the AP cycle, we're looking at them and saying, is this a non-PO invoice, a PO invoice, or even a statement? And so based on each of those doc types, there's a different data set, and some of it is similar, but we can have a very hand-in-glove fit to the capture approach that we're performing. So in the example of a non-PO, it's typically header level information, the vendor name, the invoice number, the invoice date, the amount, the tax, the freight, and maybe some other additional fields. On a PO invoice, you need all of that same header level detail plus the PO number and then the line level detail so that you can match that against the PO data and the receipt data in the DMS. A statement's a little bit different. You're doing a reconciliation of the lines on the statement, which tend to be invoices, credit memos, balances forward, and things like that. But this capture service is happening kind of behind the scenes. We're managing in the cloud, essentially in a black box, an optical character recognition tool. And then in addition to that, we provide what's called a consensus model for capture. So that means we can take those unstructured invoices, or if you think kind of handwritten type documents, which OCR really can't do a ton with, well, we can because we can route that to independent operators on our side who can extract from image. So essentially what you're doing is you're sending us your invoices, whether they're coming in via email or snail mail. We route them into this capture and validation service, and then within a defined service level window, that's converted fully to data, and we have the image available inside of AP Smart 2. And so then we move on into this coding and approval step. And this is really now where your AP team is living inside of AP Smart. They have access to the full customized automated workflow that's configured exactly how you want things to escalate in your business, right? Whether that's driven by a departmental assignment, a GL assignment, a dollar value that's driving it up the flagpole, so to speak, from an approval standpoint as invoices become higher ticket. We can essentially import into our system all of your chart of accounts, your vendor master file, so we have access to all that rich vendor data and the GLs that you can then do your selection within AP Smart and force that through any approval workflow in whatever order you'd like. We've seen that in a lot of kind of multi-store groups, the controllers or CFOs are wanting that to go into a central AP function who's doing that GL assignment and then push it to a departmental approver for their ultimate, blessing and approval before that posts to the DMS. And upon something get approved within our system, AP Smart will then essentially shift the invoice from an in approval status to approved, and that is the signal now to trigger the data release back to the DMS for the posting of that transaction. To back up a second on the PO side, as we're surfacing that PO data and ingesting the PO data from the DMS back into AP Smart, we're now kind of comparing the PO data that's gone and been extracted through the capture process against the PO data that's available in the DMS using the PO number as a reference. And depending on how you execute your PO function, your PO matching function, it can be a 2- or 3-way match that AP Smart supports. So really the difference there is in a 3-way match, you're incorporating the receipt data as well. And so you have full availability to perform the PO match based upon the business rules that you want. So some of our other clients get very in the details here in terms of purchase price variance issues that arise. We don't see that as much in the automotive space, but we have the capability to support you with that if you have specific business rules around the PO matching thresholds that are permissible. And so the goal here is to, again, remove as many of these invoices from kind of a manual processing scenario, expedite as many as you can through automation, whether it's a recurring GL code or an automated 2- or 3-way match. We want to do that where the data supports those opportunities, but the ones that need intervention will always be kind of adjudicated and handled by your AP team. So the goal of CloudX is really to give you the framework in AP Smart to manage the process digitally and to accelerate the process by providing that capture service within the defined service level window, which is usually 24 hours within receipt that document's fully converted. And so either way, once an invoice is GL coded and approved or PO matched, the invoice will then release from AP Smart, post into the DMS, and that kind of resolves this invoice presentment to posting phase of AP. From that point, you kind of move into the monetize phase, which now is essentially the payment aspect. And so CloudX essentially embraces the ability for you to then have an approval process on the payment itself, which we understand many dealerships do have a single check signer or check approver, but there are other scenarios where you want to have 2 check signers just from a control standpoint, which is totally possible. And so within our system, you can route those for approval. You can select which specific bills you want to pay, and then we communicate a funding request to our payments partner, which is Repay. And Repay has a great depth of expertise in the automotive space with many automotive clients on various DMSs, but they essentially offer payments as a service, and that can all be invoked from within the AP Smart system such that we're communicating across the vendor and invoice detail. They then perform the service where they're offering the virtual card, ACH, or check transactions at the vendor's discretion. And they do that real-time kind of vendor enablement and enrollment, and in addition to that, offer the unredeemed payment follow-up. So it really becomes a way to kind of extricate your staff out of the kind of more mundane aspects of the payment and have a fully integrated digital process that, oh, by the way, is now essentially flipping AP from a cost center into a profit center. So that's kind of the high-level perspective of how we go about kind of transitioning and transforming AP from a manual kind of laborious process into one that's highly visible and frankly just more powerful. So some of the benefits of automating AP with AP Smart. And so we've kind of covered the general philosophy of digitize, automate, and monetize, but that translates into a variety of different things. And we'll start kind of in this digitize step. The first piece would relate to having dynamic visibility. And it's difficult to kind of not stress how important this is, because moving from a manual environment, you're intersecting that data only when it's being vouchered into your DMS, right? But within AP Smart, we have access to that data from the point of conversion of the document itself. So we can see what's coming down the road. We know immediately at any given time the entire status of our AP process, when things are coming in through the capture phase, when they're being routed from an approval standpoint, which approvers are sitting on those invoices, which are assigned to AP for this exception adjudication, which invoices have some kind of an issue on it that need to be triaged, where you're having maybe a vendor discrepancy. And so we see these things kind of dynamically shifting. We can provide immediate insight to where they're at. And then additionally, we have audit trails established for every invoice from the time it presents in our system that basically delineate every change of data, status, or custody, including internal communication. So if you have comments going back and forth between users within the workflow, if you have kind of approval or delegation steps where you have somebody out on leave and you're shifting their processing responsibility or approval responsibility to another user, we have all of that centralized in our audit trail, and that stays with the document for our standard retention period, which is 7 years. And these can also be backed up locally on site as needed. So you have a complete command of visibility to the document, to the transaction, and then from a higher level perspective for any managers or CFOs or controllers on the call, if you're wanting to establish a better set of KPIs or dashboards, key performance indicators to better manage the business, we can help you do that too, because we have access to all this wonderful metadata, and it's just a matter of how you want that reporting structured. So we see common use cases for this around, accrual forecasting at month end, invoice reports by vendor, even by approver, CapEx. There's really, no limit to how you can start to parse this, because AP Smart itself, underneath it all, is a relational database. So we can query across multiple sets of criteria simultaneously and provide a structured set of reports that can even generate on an automated basis. So if you want a weekly report to see how things are flowing in your system, that's possible. If you want to look at your approver set dynamically and see exactly what invoices they have in queue and what the aging on those are, so you know who you need to maybe light a fire under to move and advance some things forward. That's all right there within the system. Of course, beyond that, we have automation ability where we can start to automatically route things, as I said, kind of using some of the intelligent workflow capabilities of the system. Tie that back to kind of how invoices are coming in through email, and we can do assignments and triggering to route invoices based on a vendor selection, based on a location, based on the rooftop itself, based on a GL code assignment, based on a departmental selection. So there's a lot of flexibility to be able to just route things how you'd like, right, along with the business rules that govern the process. And so what we like to think is that when you have this kind of visibility and you have this kind of dynamic integration back and forth via APIs to these DMSs, you can have really good things happen. And so we start to talk about outcome optimization. And that can be a subjective thing based on obviously what your goals are. Some people just want a general streamlining. They just don't want the paper clutter. And that's a given. But then what are the other things we can help you attain? So how can we help you monetize your payment stream and actually make AP a revenue generator for your business? We talked about that on the integrated payables side. How can we help you have just, like we said, a faster month-end close? If you're doing an accrual forecasting process, we can take that down in minutes. Another way, how can we help you reconcile your statements so that they're not taking, 30 minutes to break down a 50-line statement, that is done for you, and you can basically focus on the 3 or 4 line items that actually require intervention. So all of these things become possible via the approach, and you tend to find people just kind of move from one level of success to another as you kind of conquer these back office areas that have a little bit of difficulty when done manually. And of course, the time savings that are associated with that. Your people are freed up to not have to be encumbered by, like I said, the manual routine of it all. Okay. So a couple questions in terms of what percentage of invoices are fully automated. It's a little bit of a subjective question, but again, because we look at things kind of categorically on the PO and the non-PO side, you've heard the expression, for data or garbage in, garbage out, right? When the data is aligned, you can have really good outcomes here. When you have a nice, clean set of PO data matching up, you can have straight through processing possible in maybe 30 to 50% of those scenarios. On the non-PO side, you can have an even higher percentage of automation where you have recurring coding opportunities. So in other words, if you think of the vendors you have that are a little bit static, your utilities vendors, your services type vendors where things aren't changing, we can apply automated coding so that you never have to touch those. So those might have a little bit of a higher degree of automation, maybe upwards of 60, 70% of those transactions that you don't necessarily have to touch. But the benefit of the system is that you essentially have flexibility to kind of adjudicate as needed based on what's happening with either that vendor or that specific transaction. How long is the implementation process for AP Smart? This is obviously a little bit different based on the size of your dealership. If it's a single store environment, You can have something up and running within about 6 weeks, 6 to 8 weeks, depending on the DMS and what's being folded into that. In a multi-store group, the first phase is usually longer as we set the foundation and build out the workflow and come to understand your business. But then you have a generally faster process in those successive stores. So again, I would say, 6 to 8 weeks for the first store, and then probably a 2 to 4 week window for the ensuing stores. And we can also onboard those multiple at a time. But it's very important to kind of establish a strong, foundation and beachhead in that first one where you have kind of a pilot environment and expand from there, rather than kind of try to boil the ocean and do everything simultaneously. That's where I think some businesses go a little bit astray. It's just much more beneficial to kind of focus on the one and gain some success in that environment and expand it from there. How are CloudX services different than competitive offerings? There's only a handful of competitors that I've seen really that have competency in the automotive space, and I'm not quite sure why that is. AP automation has been around in other industries for, well over 10, 15 years. We like to think of ourselves as pioneers in the SaaS delivery, this, software as a service delivery with a BPO component or business process outsourcing component kind of wrapped around it. But with respect to other competitors in this space, we think that the statement reconciliation service that we offer is fundamentally different than what anyone else is offering. And we also understand how many vendors are actually paying, or I should say how many dealerships are paying from statement. It's a substantial percentage of payments that are actually originated from the statement itself. And so our software allows you to select whether you want to pay from invoice or from statement, right, once that statement's been reconciled. So I think that that's a major differentiator, the ability for us to handle document types beyond just an invoice, right? We also process things like bills of lading, delivery tickets, warehouse receipts, receiver documents, credit memos, tax documents. So there can be quite a few different things that are kind of tied into that I think give us a bit of a competitive advantage. I just mentioned this vendor statement rec. Essentially, we're performing a service where when a statement comes in, we have the underlying invoices in the system already indexed with the images fully available and all of the status information on that invoice. So when a statement comes in, we do a reconciliation process for you to tie the invoices to the statement digitally. So essentially within our system, you can alternate from the invoice to the statement view, but moreover, you can see immediately what status are those invoices in. Are there invoices that are listed on the statement that are missing that haven't yet come into the AP process, and consequently there's no image or data to support it? We can kind of break that down for you immediately so you don't have to go through that statement on a line-by-line basis. We'll do that dirty work for you, and then you can focus on the ones that actually need attention. Like in the case of a missing statement, you can contact the vendor and say, hey, we need these invoice numbers, right? We'll capture that off the statement. For the ones that are in approval or an exception, we'll highlight those. And so it just becomes a big time saver where you don't have to go through as granularly as you may have in the past. In terms of how does AP Smart integrate with my DMS? All of the connections we have thus far have been established via APIs through the DMS providers. So for DealerTrack, that's via the OpenTrack API. Via CDK, we're operating via the PIPs within CDK. Techion's been established as a direct API, and we're building out the other integrations as we go. And we foresee an expansion to more DMSs past those initial 5 that I mentioned. Finally, what size dealerships or automotive groups can AP Smart and CloudX work for? Really, we have use cases from, single store environments up to groups with almost, 20 stores across multiple regions and multiple states. So it can really scale well and really have a powerful use case across the board, from whether you're a mom and pop dealer up to a multi-store group in multiple regions. We have it all. Okay, and so we have a couple slides with some use cases here. So we've had the wonderful opportunity to work with H&H Automotive out in Omaha, Nebraska since 2017. Jelaine, who's still at H&H, has just been a wonderful pioneer, real thought leader in the space, and has done tremendously well. They've actually had even multiple DMSs and a migration process there on their side, and maintained the use of AP Smart through it, which helped us establish some of our DMS connections there. And in addition, beyond just the core DMS, they also have power sports stores that are on other, proprietary systems. So they're actually ingesting data from multiple back-end systems and then interfacing back to those systems with the transactions being pushed. So really it's helped her to expand as they've grown their dealerships without having to scale up from a staff perspective. The visibility has been a massive piece for them, and just some of the control. I think just a tighter set of controls over the process has been really, really helpful. Similarly, we work with another group called Lou Fuse Automotive Network out in St. Louis with 12 stores. And it's different how the value derived from the system is kind of subjective to the eyes of the person using it. And for Joe Burris here, one of the things that was very big was kind of the standardization of pricing within stores from vendors, right, to make sure that they were kind of establishing a standardization and just getting things aligned that way. So just to be able to have like the paper-free invoice and statement rec process for him was a big deal and a win. And so that's a couple different examples. Of course, we have more we could share, but there's only so much time that we have today together. Finally, so I'll tap Mr. Stearns here to chime in about our benchmark assessment and some other ways we can connect.
Yeah, good afternoon again. Again, appreciate you guys. And so, yes, in terms of next steps, we can create a business case. And as Chris had mentioned, we work with different size dealerships. So whether they're one store or they're 20 stores, we can definitely correlate where there's going to be a certain amount of efficiencies gained through the use of the technology. And so we use information that we've got from there was a survey that were taken a couple of years ago by the Aberdeen Group, and then also we take information from the accounts payable network, and then we bounce that off of your data. So what we can do is we send you just a list of questions, and so you would complete those. They're just basically rough estimates, and then we bounce that off against the industry data, and then we can show you where you're at in terms of your cost to process an invoice and a statement, and then what your future state would look like in terms of savings, and then also on the monetization side, just based on your spend, the number of checks, we can determine savings, and then also the potential rebates that you can get from the solution. And then obviously, a picture's worth 1,000 words. So we'd love to invite you to a demo to see the solution. Usually that's kind of the next step, and then we would create the business case after that. But also we can send the document ahead of time, because some of the dealers like to kind of list some of their pain points, and then we would incorporate that into the demo, and then also provide that business case, so you know where you're at and what you're going to look like after automation.
All right. Wonderful. Thank you, Chris. Very good. So I think we have a couple questions that have come in, so we can address those. So the first off was, I think, cost and time to make the transition. So I think we hopefully addressed the time to implement. First store, again, would probably be 6 to 8 weeks, and then from there 2 to 4 weeks per successive store. And we do advise that kind of phased implementation approach. We couldn't certainly take on multiple stores simultaneously, but it becomes a matter of kind of whether you want to try to boil the ocean or gain some momentum and kind of establish positive workflows. As for cost, we do have a couple different ways that we cost things. There are some implementation costs for the kind of initial phase, since there's a fair amount of professional services work where we're loading in user data, establishing a capture process, training up your users on how to actually use the system, and then testing invoices through end to end. But we try to keep those, nominal and justifiable as well. And internally we assign, a variety of personnel to that. So do you understand kind of what you're getting from that would be internal kind of project management, a US-based, architect, and then multiple devs on our side as we kind of move through phases of that implementation. Once we move to go live, our costing is transactional, so it's not driven by number of users or seat counts or licenses, but it's really kind of centered around the number of transactional documents you're processing per month. But if we go down the road that Chris just mentioned with the assessment, we can give you kind of a customized pricing based on where you rank in terms of the dealership count, which then obviously influences like the number of approvers that are tied to it, but also consequently the volume of invoices. The second question is how much of my staff's time is required to make this changeover? Not much. I mean, most of the technical work is done by us, and really we adopt kind of a train-the-trainer approach. So the AP department is obviously going to get spooled up and become experts in the system. We do envision this as a true kind of vendor partnership where we're with you for the duration, right? Helping you on a dynamic basis, not only during the implementation phase and then we sail off into the sunset, but no, as you have needs that arise, we're very much kind of partner oriented and help you maximize the value out of the system. So the initial kind of legwork to get the system up is a little bit, but we're managing that through kind of a weekly project call, right? A webinar call where we're having kind of deliverables assigned by our PM on our side for both your team to execute and ours. As we move through that and then transition to go live, it becomes just a natural use of the system, right? And so the nature of their work will change because they're not doing the data entry anymore and they're freed up to do kind of higher order items or other things that you may have them to do. Next question is, if I am using your services for a year or so and decide I no longer want your services, what happens? Well, simply you can unwind the service. That's fine. We can revert back to you all the invoice, metadata in detail for those transactions, in whatever format you'd prefer. That being said, we have a very strong retention rate. We churn less than 5% of our customers. So once the system has gotten up and running and is, functioning, pushing invoices into the DMS, and it's been rolled out, most of our clients tend to actually retain the service and do very well with it. Another question is, many invoices come in from stores from each department. What is the best practice for getting those invoices into the system? Manager reviewing, approving, and scanning in. So again, this is subjective, and rather than say, what the best way is from our perspective, we would kind of turn that back and say, well, how would you like things to go? Because in some instances, there's a centralization, right, which there's always an advantage, I think, to centralizing the AP function, but that can be challenging based on the layout of your group. I have a group in mind that is centered in New Hampshire, right, 5 stores there, they have stores in Tennessee, Colorado, so it's kind of this extended organization, and so they have to approach things almost on a more of a regional basis, which can be very different than, say, a group that's centered around one major city, right, where things can be a lot more consolidated. And that being said, some people like to have everything route into AP first and then push to the departmental manager for review, or they want AP to at least attempt it and then only tap the departmental manager when AP is uncertain of how an allocation should be done. But in your case, it might be the case that you want the manager to review it first and then AP does the final approval process. From our perspective, the system can work either way. It's just a function of what do you prefer and what controls you want built around it. So there's a variety of ways to kind of look at that, and we'd be happy to address that offline.
All right, we have several people that have asked questions. Thanks, and you can continue to do that through the Q&A box. And here's another one. What DMSs does AP Smart integrate with?
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. So presently, 3 live integrations would be DealerTrack, Techion, and CDK. And then we're actively building out the integrations to DealerBuilt and View DMS from Dominion.
And here's another. How do you make sure that the invoice data is accurate?
So every invoice goes through a validation process. So from what's called OCR, or optical character recognition, that is useful for structured data, machine generated, printed type PDFs where everything is kind of clean. every item that gets OCR'd in our system also goes through a human validation process there. And then for the items that are unstructured, if you think about your haulers, your auto body, your tow guys, your repair, dent repair, a lot of times these guys are doing less sophisticated, handwritten, almost like multi-part receipts. You just scribble it out. And so for those, we route them through what's called a consensus model, where we have multiple independent operators extracting data from image until we have a reconciled result. And we can even escalate that if there's not a reconciled result to an adjudication on our side. And so everything isn't just going through an AI process where there's no, human eyeball looking at it. Everything is going through a validation step. And through that two-stage process, we're essentially getting near perfect data.
Okay, here's another. How long does it take to process an invoice?
Typically, within 24 hours of receipt, that invoice is fully captured and indexed. We can also offer an enhanced month-end kind of expedited close where people are receiving stuff back same day. We know how strenuous the close period is and how crucial getting those invoices posted within the month period is to your business. And so we can kind of enhance that service towards the end of the month. And so our dealers will typically reach out and say, hey, these 3 days we need to get this stuff in same day, and we can structure service levels that support that kind of delivery.
All right, here is another. Does it matter PO versus non-PO invoices?
No, system is capable of handling either PO or non-PO. Most clients have a pretty healthy mix of the two, and some companies are a little further down the road of enforcing PO origination. Certainly we like that because you have a much more concrete data set to match against, and you can have some nice automation. But on the non-PO side, as I said earlier, you can also set up things for kind of recurring GL coding, where we're looking at how things were previously done in the system, and it's predicting how it might be done going forward, so you don't have to go through a GL coding effort each time.
All right, and do you have a mobile application?
So we do have a mobile application that is going to be released in Q2 of this year. That's going to enable your departmental approvers primarily to be able to access their queue of invoices for approval, to search, and then ultimately to either do a GL assignment within there or approve or reject those invoices. For your AP staff, really this system is best suited for kind of a desktop experience, just the way the system lays out with the metadata on the left side of the image, or the screen, I should say, and the image on the right. But for the mobile app, it should be ready for Q2 and will predominantly affect the approvers in the field.
Okay, probably have time for just one more here. Can AP Smart manage documents other than invoices and statements?
Yeah, so again, at its core, AP Smart is an electronic document management system with a sophisticated and robust workflow around it. But clients have used it, use its ability to manage documents to extend to other doc types. So certainly things like credit memos or tax documents, or even supporting documents, creating an informational packet around an invoice. These things can be extended within the system so that you can get even more value out of it from a document storage perspective. And then also, of course, some of the DMSs also facilitate a document delivery back into the DMS, where we're actually passing the image file back to the DMS and storing it there. So effectively image enabling the invoice record, not only in AP Smart, but also in your DMS as well.
All right, Keith, why don't I have you activate your webcam, come back on here to get ready to close the session.
All right. Well, I wanted to say thanks to Chris Cosgrove and Chris Stearns. Learned quite a bit today, and it sounds like if you take the effort of digitizing and monetizing and automating your AP invoices and payment processes, that it could certainly have a positive impact on the profitability of your dealership, and even more so on the time of your AP staff. If you're looking to get a copy of this webinar, it'll be available in approximately 24 hours. If you're interested in getting a copy of that, if you would, please text Chris Austin, and you can text him at 612-386-3898 or at sales@strategicsource.com. We say thank you again for joining us today, and be on the lookout for our next innovative supplier webinar, and we look forward to seeing you then.